common misconception among people is that any rule or regulation that governs them falls under one category: law. But there are many other forms of law that people abide by without realizing that they simply do not apply to them. Another misconception is that a nation's constitution gives us our rights. A constitution does nothing more than list the rights that we already have. We are born with inalienable rights, endowed to us by our Creator. They are not given to us, and they cannot be given away. The most a person can do with a right is choose whether to exercise it or not. Maritime admiralty law is what's known as the law of the water. It is superseded by civil law and only applies to those who willingly contract themselves into it. The definition of admiralty law is a body of private international law governing the relationships between private entities which operate vessels on the oceans. Let's look at how and why a form of law that is fashioned to govern corporations, businesses, and vessels has imposed its rule over natural human beings. This is all done through a form of word magic. A simple perversion of language has made it possible to convince people around the world that these alternative laws apply to them. One of the predominant beliefs in modern culture is that licenses, permits, registrations, and other forms of documentation are required to operate motor vehicles, use public roads, build structures and establishments, engage in free enterprise, and much more. Sadly, these beliefs are based on little to no investigation whatsoever, and are false. This belief structure is perpetuated by maritime admiralty law. This form of law was originally created to govern ships docking in foreign nations for the import or export of products and resources. It deals with banking and merchant affairs, not civil affairs. When a product is taken off of a ship and brought into a foreign land, that nation takes custody of the resource and accounts for it with a certificate. That certificate marks the birth date of that product in the custody of the respective nation. Think of why it is supposedly required to have a certificate of live birth in the first place. The Barron's Dictionary of Banking Terms defines a certificate as a paper establishing an ownership claim. So right there, we notice that everyone with a birth certificate is defined as being owned. People are used as collateral with other nations because the U.S. is bankrupt. The United States declared bankruptcy on March 9th of 1933. At this point, the U.S. began taking out loans from a private, non-government affiliated corporation called the Federal Reserve. With no money to pay back the loans, the United States began using the citizens as collateral. All birth and marriage certificates are literally warehouse receipts. Just look at the similarities of warehouse receipts and birth certificates. Both document the date of issue, a serial number, registration number or receipt number, a description of the product, and an authorized informant to notify the appropriate government agency. With all of this information being readily available, the majority of people are unaware of their involvement with maritime admiralty law. This is possible through the manipulation of language. This admiralty law changed the meaning of the word person from a natural living person to a corporation. Driver's licenses, vehicle registrations, auto insurance forms, building permits, gun permits, work permits, tax filing documents, birth and death certificates, traffic citations, and many other forms of documentation that were once believed to be absolutely necessary only apply to persons or corporations. Upon signing such a legal document, you are indirectly waiving your rights under the Constitution and lowering your status to that of a corporation that is created with the same exact name as you. The only way to reconcile your true name from the name of the corporation is to take notice that the corporation has its name in all capital letters. This is known as capitis diminutia maxima.
Given what most Americans believe, the next statement may be more shocking than any previous. The fact is, the United States is not a country, but a corporation contractually created by the Constitution. Your state is a country, per the law, and your original citizenship is of that country. Our founders instituted themselves to be first and foremost citizens of their respective states. As of 1787, those states already had formed a union, and they created the Constitution for the purpose of perfecting that union in forming a national government. They did not intend that the new nation have any jurisdiction or powers over the states or their citizens that were not specifically enumerated in the Constitution. They stated this point quite clearly in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution. They granted the United States exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district not exceeding 10 miles square as may become the seat of the government of the United States, our District of Columbia, and to exercise authority over all places purchased by the consent of the states. And that is all. The framers further secured the rights of the people with the 9th and 10th Amendments in the Bill of Rights. In the 9th, they established that the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. And in the 10th, they made clear that the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. The only way the federal government can have any jurisdiction beyond these constitutional clauses is by written permission or contract. Which leads us to another piece of the puzzle, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, ratified in 1868 following the Civil War. As barbaric as it may sound today, the black slaves, prior to the conclusion of the Civil War, were legally considered to be property, with none of the rights or privileges of free-born people, only duties. The money interests took advantage of America's desire to free the slaves, and found a way to use the swiftly adopted post-war constitutional amendments to enslave all of the people. The deceit is in the wording of both the 13th and 14th Amendments. You will note that the 13th Amendment provides that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States. But why the emphasis on involuntary servitude? Isn't it the same thing as slavery? Sure it is. But they had to mention the concept of involuntary servitude because they wished to retain another type of slavery, voluntary servitude. Voluntary servitude is an ancient and established concept. It was the way serfs became subjects to their lords during feudal times in England and other European countries. It was a way for free men to earn a living at a time when all property was held by a select few, and thus anyone who wanted to farm and support their family had first to agree to be subject to a lord of the land. Our forefathers hated this concept and designed our Constitution to exclude titles of nobility, making all Americans sovereign. The 14th Amendment turned the intention of the founders on its ear by making voluntary servitude a requirement for former slaves to gain the rights already guaranteed to free-born United States citizens. When the slaves were released from their involuntary servitude following the war, their status was changed from that of being property to that of being a person. But being a person still entitled them to none of the rights associated with citizenship. So the 14th Amendment ostensibly was written to provide the former slaves with the same constitutional rights of free-born American citizens, but only if they agreed first to become subject to the jurisdiction of the corporate United States. Making oneself paramountly, that is, first subject to the jurisdiction of the laws of the United States, however, limits access to parts of the Bill of Rights, as we'll explain in a moment. But first remember, anyone who voluntarily subjects himself to the laws or jurisdiction of another is, in every way, obligated to abide by the terms of any contracts or laws established by whomever establishes the rules of the contract. In simple terms, this meant that the former slaves became subjects first to the United States, and secondly to the state in which they lived. They had no sovereignty whatsoever. This status had never existed in the United States prior to that time. The 14th Amendment created a new class of citizenship in the United States, a second-class citizenship. Up until 1868, every American was a paramount citizen of their state, and by virtue of that, also a citizen of the United States, with full individual sovereignty as guaranteed by Amendments 9 and 10 in the Bill of Rights. But so-called naturalized citizens, or 14th Amendment citizens, are paramountly subject to all laws of the United States, and, having no status as freeborn citizens, have no access at all to the unenumerated rights retained for the people by Articles 9 and 10 of the Bill of Rights. That's because, in order to get any rights at all, they had to subject themselves to the jurisdiction of the corporate United States, which left them no unenumerated rights. The only rights they had were those specifically written into the Constitution. The sad tragedy of America today is that all U.S. citizens, regardless of race, are now 14th Amendment slaves due to contracts with the government of the United States through Social Security, birth certificates, driving licenses, citizenship statements, tax forms, and many other documents. The true paramount citizenship that all Americans deserve is that of their respective state, which is a sovereign citizenship. Such status would exempt them from federal and state income taxes, as well as property and inheritance taxes. This sovereign citizenship was the status held by our forefathers. Now, if you're still thinking that the U.S. government needs to have a central bank and collect income tax or it will collapse, think again. Over 2/3 of the federal government's income is derived from sources other than income tax. There is even evidence suggesting that none of your income tax is used by the government. Fees, excise taxes, tariffs, sales taxes, and other forms of income have easily supported the U.S. budget in the past and could easily support it now. We have done without a national bank for large stretches of our history, and the U.S. Treasury is perfectly capable of printing and managing a money supply. In fact, the only constitutionally sanctioned currency is backed by gold or other precious metals. This is a far more stable form of currency and is the type of money the Treasury was designed to handle. The government was doing so well collecting money under these original laws that it had amassed a huge surplus by the time this cartoon was penned 100 years later in 1887, when there still was no income tax collected at all. Up to this point, we have shown you how the money interests have 1. Established the Federal Reserve System, and 2. Exploited a second class of citizenship created by the 14th Amendment for other purposes. And we have mentioned a few names involved in the creation of the Fed. But there are other organizations working for our economic enslavement as well, along with other extremely rich and powerful international bankers. Those who support the Fed have created a global movement to centralize economic power in various puppet organizations that preach peace and stability through some variation of socialism, but act aggressively to draw nations into a web of foreign debt and servitude to their agenda. The United Nations, the World Monetary Fund, and the Council on Foreign Relations are all committed to an agenda of world domination through manipulation of economic power. The Council on Foreign Relations openly admits to being a private club, yet it is the primary recruiting post in both international banking and the federal government of the United States.
In 1868, the 14th Amendment was ratified, ending slavery by giving all Americans citizenship. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the states wherein they reside. United States Code annotated Amendment 14. However, what the public was not told, that while under the Lieber Code, a 14th Amendment citizen can only be found within the jurisdiction of the United States. That is, all government employees, all those who live in territories occupied by the federal government, such as Washington, D.C., and the former slaves. The rest of the population was not subject to the 14th Amendment, and thus could still claim jurisdiction under the original Constitution. In addition to that, after the conclusion of the Civil War, the federal government was now occupying the southern states, placing these captured citizens under the jurisdiction of the Lieber Code. The southern states had to agree to ratify this amendment in order for them to be granted their freedom from federal rule. Thus, instead of ending slavery, the 14th Amendment held all Southerners captive as slaves in the plantation known as the United States of America. Just like how all citizens were turned into corporations in 1790 to subject them to the Revolutionary War debts, 14th Amendment citizens were created to be franchisees subject to the corporation known as the United States Incorporated. And like all corporate brands, you do not have any constitutional Bill of Rights protections. Proof of such can be found in the all-caps version of your name, which signifies a corporate entity. After the Civil War, the United States defaulted on its war debt. During the bankruptcy proceedings, cunning lawyers in league with international bankers found a loophole within Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the United States Constitution, which allowed the creation of a duplicate entity known as the Corporation of the United States of America to replace the now bankrupt and defunct Republic of the United States of America. This occurred with the passage of the District of Columbia Organic Act of 1871, which incorporated the area of the District of Columbia into a private foreign corporation chartered in the City of London known as the United States Incorporated. This corporation designated Congress as the board of directors to continue the business needs of the government under martial law. Thanks to the Lieber Code, federal jurisdiction under the Organic Act was expanded to include not only all captured citizens in the southern states, but all Americans in all states. Thus, America had lost her sovereignty under the yoke of the Crown of England and the international bankers. During this same time, the Corporation of the United States adopted its own constitution, which was identical to the original national constitution. To fool the people, one word was changed from its original form, the Constitution for the United States of America, to its present-day all-capitalized form, which signifies a corporate entity, the Constitution of the United States of America. Incidentally, the Titles of Nobility Amendment was removed from this new Constitution. With the Illuminati in full control over the United States, they now sought to rule the world. After the death of Adam Weishaupt in 1830, Giuseppe Mazzini was selected to head the Illuminati. In 1871, the mantle of power was passed on again to the American General Albert Pike as its new director. Pike became fascinated with the idea of a one-world government and eventually constructed the Illuminati's blueprint of world domination. His plans called for the financing of 3 world wars in the 20th century. The First War would bring about an atheist communist state from the ashes of Tsarist Russia. The Second War would bring about a Jewish Holocaust under a fascist government to ferment support of a Zionist state of Israel. The Third War would manipulate the differences of Christians and Muslims for their own annihilation. Then finally, political Zionism would come out as victors of all. These 3 world wars would require enormous funding. Since most of the royalty in Europe was already deeply in debt thanks to the numerous wars and conflicts created by the Rothschild banking dynasty, the only place left that could possibly pay for such ambitious plans was the now prosperous American Republic. After the Civil War, the United States went through a great industrial expansion. The new industries of oil, steel, textile, and railroad all needed generous financing, which the Rothschild family was more than eager to provide. To access these markets, the Rothschilds sent their agent, Jacob Schiff, to infiltrate the New York banking scene, which was controlled by J.P. Morgan. By the turn of the century, the Rothschilds had fully entrenched themselves into the tight fraternity of Wall Street banks, such as Goldman Sachs and Lehman Brothers. They now sought their most prized possession, full control over the American monetary system. With help from Jacob Schiff and J.P. Morgan, the Rothschilds formed a scheme which would seduce Congress into relinquishing control over the money supply. This occurred with the Panic of 1907, when a liquidity crisis caused many banks and businesses to fail all across the United States. The meltdown began when J.P. Morgan published rumors that the Knickerbocker Trust Company of New York was insolvent. With a bank run on hand, they were forced to call in their loans, creating a chain reaction which would threaten to implode the entire banking system. The failures continued until J.P. Morgan and Company provided a generous loan to the insolvent banks. But J.P. Morgan was not trying to save the American banking system, but rather he used the crisis to destroy his competition by choosing which banks he would bail out. But the biggest casualty of the economic fallout was the looming bankruptcy of the Corporation of the United States, which had no means to pay back their loans which were due in 1912. In anticipation of this bankruptcy, representatives from the world's most powerful families met in November 1910 at a secret meeting at the Jekyll Island Club Resort in Georgia to discuss the foreclosure of the Corporation of the United States and to brainstorm solutions which would prevent future liquidity crises such as occurred during the Panic of 1907. Those in attendance included Senator Nelson Aldrich, Paul Warburg, representatives from J.P. Morgan and Company, and Jacob Schiff, representing the Rothschild family. They proposed a 20-year extension on the national debt if the United States would agree to charter a privately owned central bank, which would serve as a bank of last resort by lending money to other insolvent banks in order to prevent future bank runs. A week later, they emerged with their plans to create what is known as the Federal Reserve System. Because the current President Taft would never agree to sign away the American monetary system to a cabal of international bankers, they waited until they got their man, the progressive Woodrow Wilson, into power. In return for the bankers' generous campaign contributions, Woodrow Wilson reluctantly promised the bankers he would sign the Federal Reserve Act if he was elected into office. Many powerful forces were opposed to the creation of a privately controlled central bank. To neutralize this threat, J.P. Morgan invited the major opponents of the Federal Reserve Act on board the maiden voyage of the newly built Titanic luxury steamliner built by the White Star Line, owned by J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan ordered the captain to steer his ship into an iceberg and under gunpoint prevented the men from escaping onto the lifeboats, killing many of his enemies in one large swoop. When word of this got back to Woodrow Wilson, he commented, "There exists this power in the world, so subtle, so organized, so watchful, that we dare not speak above a whisper when we speak in condemnation of it." At the beginning of 1913, the United States had defaulted on its debt. After being denied a new line of credit, the now President Woodrow Wilson faced a constitutional crisis. With no other sources of funding, he went along with the bankers' schemes engineered at the Jekyll Island Resort. To avoid any opposition, Senator Nelson Aldrich quickly pushed the Federal Reserve Act through both houses of Congress. On December 23, 1913, while most of Congress was away on Christmas vacation, a quorum call was issued. A few selected congressional traitors voted by voice to avoid public record and passed the Federal Reserve Act, which President Wilson signed into law. Wilson later admitted with remorse when referring to the Fed, "I have unwittingly ruined my country." This act gave away the keys of the printing presses at the U.S. Treasury to a foreign corporation chartered under the Crown of England, known as the Federal Reserve Bank.
The Federal Reserve was created by Congress in 1913, and it was entrusted with the power granted originally to the Congress by the U.S. Constitution to coin money and regulate the value thereof.
The Federal Reserve Bank advertises itself as a non-profit corporation that operates as if it's another branch of the government. However, its board members are unelected, and their meetings are conducted behind the closed doors away from public scrutiny.
The board of directors of the Federal Reserve System is chosen by the president from a list prepared by the bankers themselves.
It's important that whomever I pick is viewed as an independent person from politics.
All this secrecy becomes very suspicious, considering how the Federal Reserve monitors and controls trillions of dollars within the world's banking system. After the federal government lost its ability to issue its own money, the national debt soon soared to astronomical heights, because now the government had to pay the Federal Reserve interest on all its currency printed to circulation. But this interest on the national debt could never be repaid, as the Federal Reserve required all debts to be repaid with gold, which the government did not have. And even worse, the interest portion of the national debt was not issued into the money supply. In other words, more and more debt would have to be issued to continue servicing the growing interest payments on all loans. In order to cover this interest payment, Congress was forced to pass the income tax legislation, which became law in 1913 with the ratification of the 16th Amendment, also known as the Income Tax Amendment. Initially, they levied a 1% voluntary tax on all incomes over $3,000 and a progressive surtax on all incomes over $20,000, but this would soon increase with the outbreak of World War I and World War II. Income tax allowed the Federal Reserve System to confiscate the earnings of the common man, but the industrialists and financiers were exempted from paying any income tax because they could afford to hide their assets in tax-free foundations which they claimed were devoted to philanthropy. Examples of such include the Rockefeller Foundation, the Mellon Foundation, and the Carnegie Endowment.
The main purpose of the income tax is not to raise revenue, but to redistribute wealth and to control society.
Technically, the 16th Amendment was not ratified by the necessary states, as it violates the constitutional clause of no direct taxes. Despite this, Congress went ahead and taxed the people anyway. The government was able to do this because under their corporate charter, Congress was operating as the board of directors, and therefore they had the authority to enter this amendment as ratified. But remember, this amendment has nothing to do with the original United States Constitution, which was replaced back in 1871 with the corporate constitution.
It's actually very simple. Congress tried to enact an income tax in 1894. The Supreme Court said that's unconstitutional. When the Supreme Court says something is unconstitutional, it's unconstitutional. They tried again in 1913, and the Supreme Court said the 16th Amendment conferred no new power of taxation. So, if they didn't have it then, and they didn't get it, they don't have it. There is no constitutional basis for a tax on the wages of Americans living and working in the 50 states of the Union. Period. End of argument.
In 1933, the United States once again declared bankruptcy. To make all citizens subject to repayment of the national debt, the bankers chartered a Delaware corporation known as the Bureau of Internal Revenue. But this corporation was illegally masquerading as part of the government, placing them under constant threat of lawsuit. To escape this litigation, they moved their jurisdiction outside of the United States to Puerto Rico. This occurred in 1953 when they changed their name to the Internal Revenue Service, or IRS, incorporated as a Puerto Rican trust within the division of the Department of the Treasury of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. Further proof can be found within the United States Code, which lists the IRS as Trust Fund Number 62, the Puerto Rico Special Fund Internal Revenue. This was done to divert all income tax payments to the International Monetary Fund, owned by the various central banks of Europe and North America, which in turn are owned by the Crown of England.
There is a substantial, conclusive body of evidence that proves that our income tax system represents the most pernicious form of tyranny. It is the greatest hoax ever perpetrated by government against the working men and women of America.
I can eliminate all income taxes tomorrow and have more than enough money to fund the government by using some other guy's bright idea. We tax the Federal Reserve at 0.0006, doubles our money until we decide to put them out of business permanently, because we certainly should not have central banks.
The evidence proving income tax is paid to the United Kingdom is found deep within the IRS Individual Master File, which contains every transaction and financial record gathered by IRS officials throughout your lifetime. One of these codes determines what kind of tax you are paying. After looking this code up within the IRS 6209 manual, you find that they have incorrectly classified all Americans as domiciled corporations in either Guam, the Virgin Islands, or Puerto Rico. Furthermore, all taxpayers who filled out a 1040 form are subject to a tax for doing commerce with the United Kingdom under a treaty with the United States.
There is no law that requires the average American worker in the private sector to pay a direct unapportioned tax on their labor and compensation for services. There is no law.
As you follow the money trail, you find that the taxes collected on the 1040 form is then sent to the Crown of England as a tribute payment. The Crown of England is a sovereign corporation located within the 677 acres of the city, found within the heart of Greater London. This tiny strip of land contains the world's most powerful banking houses, such as the Bank of England and Lloyd's of London, owned by the House of Rothschild. It is these bankers and their counterpart, the Temple Bar attorneys, that constitute the power base known simply as the Crown. Even though the Queen of England is a member of this club, she is not its corporate head. That job was given to the Pontiff of Rome. The Pope was given control over the monarchy with the signing of the Treaty of 1213 between King John and Pope Innocent III, which forever pledged England as a vassal state of the Holy Roman Empire. In 1297, that treaty was used as a precedent to incorporate the city as an independent city-state controlled by the Vatican, which would govern England without directly relying on the monarchy. Just like how the Corporation of the United States was subject to the Crown of England, so too were the subjects of the British Empire, enslaved with debt by the financial division of the Vatican, headquartered within the City of London. Today, this small clique of bankers have full authority over the affairs of Parliament, and this has been the case since 1694, when Pope Innocent XI hired William of Orange to depose the Stuart kings and charter the Bank of England. Located within the Crown of England is the original Federal Reserve Charter, which according to the Farmer Claims legal team, allocates that 67% of the income tax collected by the IRS was to be divided to the Crown of England. Another 23% was to be paid as a dividend to the 300 shareholders of the Federal Reserve Bank, and the last 10% was to be paid to the employees of the IRS to keep them quiet about this sweet deal. Since 1913, none of the income tax collected by the IRS has gone to the federal government. The federal government is funded totally through black budget sources, such as drug trafficking and off-budget accounting on the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report.
My name is Jordan Maxwell. For the past 43 years of my life, I have spent researching and studying the world of hidden knowledge, ancient mysteries, occult and secret societies, fraternal orders. My real first love is theology, occult theology. But let me warn you, and let me say that the word occult does not mean evil or bad. It carries that denotation, but it's not really bad. Occult simply means hidden. Anything which is hidden is occult. It's a Latin word for hidden. Consequently, so much of knowledge, important spiritual, political, sociological knowledge, it's been hidden. And so I have spent, as I said, the past 43 years of my life searching out hidden knowledge. And that's what I do. I'm fascinated by how much we don't know. The State of Israel is actually connected to America in a very arcane and secret way. So they are, the State of Israel is connected to the American federal system. That's very interesting. That's why America sends billions and billions and billions of dollars. Quite literally, I've heard the figure per year, something like $17 billion a year to the State of Israel. Incredible amounts of money. Why? There's something else going on here, and they haven't told you the whole story. If you were looking down from a satellite, looking down onto the Earth, or even higher out than a satellite would be, you would see that the largest single landmass on the Earth is from Russia, from the northeast tip of Russia, all the way across to Central West Africa, to the West African coast. Then from England, Ireland, England, all the way across to India. And you crisscross the largest single landmass on the earth. That cross comes right through the city of Jerusalem. That's where it crosses. And so the old ancient Phoenician Canaanites, being the bankers, they said, if you come in through town to do business, Jack, you're going to pay us up front. And so whoever controls Jerusalem controls the flow of oil, drugs, all kinds of products, the flow of gold, diamonds, all the valuable things in the world goes through Jerusalem. That's why it's the holy city. Money, international, monetary world situation set up so that all money, all flowing of business, commerce goes through Jerusalem. That's the name of the tomb, and that's why Jerusalem is so important to the American people. Now, you've got to give the people a reason why Israel is so important. Now, we know that Israel is very important because of strategically where it sits on the trade routes to control the flow of oil, drugs, diamonds, and a lot of drugs in Israel, going through Israel. Major movements of illicit narcotics and drugs through Israel. And diamonds, gold, money, etc., etc. But you've got to give the people who are going to go over there and lose their lives and give their sons in war, you've got to give them a reason. So we tell them that it's religious. It's the Lord's chosen people, the Lord's people. And the Lord himself has chosen Israel. And we give them a line. You'd be surprised what Americans love. They love that kind of stuff. And so we tell them, it's the Lord's will. And the Lord Jesus was there, and all the great prophets and all of that. And so we have to protect that little country, Israel, because it's the Lord's will. So I believe that all of these things which are happening right now in the Middle East there are many factors involved, obviously. It's not just oil. It's not just money. Those are the cards on the table. When you're laying out the game and you're going to play a game, a high-stakes game, say in Las Vegas, where hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars are laying on the table, and you're playing a high-stakes game, you're going to have the cards you've got that you're playing. Well, one of the cards that's being used in this high-stakes game is, of course, oil. One of them is, of course, drugs. Drugs are very big business in the Middle East and in Europe, and so I feel that the drugs are one card, oil is a second card, the control of money, banking, fraternities, controlling the flow of commerce and business in the world, that's another card on the table. But above the cards are the players only using the cards. And I think the players in this world game that's being laid out for us now are guided not by the cards. They're guided by something else. There's something else going on here. And it has to do with secret societies and ancient religions. People have been living from day to day, never realizing the profound impact secrets have on us. Secret government, secret projects, secret knowledge. And today we are beginning to see that the world is in serious trouble. I believe that the things which are going on in the world today, not the least of which the Middle Eastern war and Middle Eastern intrigue, I think the machinations that are going on behind the scenes of world government are being orchestrated. I have no doubt in my mind, after 43 years of looking at this subject, that so much of our world, the wars, the violence, the bloodshed, the animosity among races, is purposely designed by someone. Catholic Church is involved in Israel. They're involved in the Holocaust. When the Germans saw, when the Nazis saw that the war was going bad for them and they were going to lose the war, that was like 1944, all the top Nazis were given Vatican passports and given safe passage and money through the Vatican banks. Money was given to all the top Nazis to get them out. So the Vatican sent a bunch of Nazis to Uruguay, Paraguay, Brazil, Argentina. We know they're down there. Well, it's all Catholic down there. That's right. That's why they're down there. The scientists and the theoreticians, they sent directly through the CIA, which is the Knights of Malta organization for the Catholic Church. Catholic Church is CIA. CIA is Catholic Church. The CIA broke into the Watergate Hotel. Watergate Hotel is owned by the Vatican. The owners of the Watergate Hotel today in Washington, D.C. is owned by the Catholic Church. It's a Vatican owner. The Vatican owns the Watergate. And the CIA was in there doing their dirty work in the Watergate Hotel. And then they got Nixon kicked out of office because Nixon realized that the Vatican is involved in all this crap and the English involved in all this crap, so the Vatican set up their own people. Send the CIA into, well, we can't do it in just any place. That's all right, send it to our hotel, we'll take care of it. Reinhard Gehlen was not only a Knights of Malta, but he was also one of the founders of today, the CIA. Reinhard Gehlen was the man in charge of security for Adolf Hitler. He was chief of security for the Nazi Empire, Reinhard Gehlen. And when he saw that things were going bad and they were going to lose, Reinhard Gehlen was chief of security. He's not an idiot. And this guy knows the war is up. We've lost. So he goes to the Vatican, and the Vatican gets him a ticket over here to work for America, and he comes over here and sets up something called the CIA. All of these religious leaders in America on television, they have contracts under the table with international oil cartels, drug cartels, banking cartels, and they are reaping in millions of dollars in private profits in European banks that American Christians have no idea in the world about. But all you have to do is just start doing some homework and checking on all of the so-called Christian leaders who are all for the state of Israel. Find out how much money did you make last year. Then you begin finding out the oil companies put up millions of dollars for Christian churches to send out missions. So many of the Christian missionaries that go out around the world, and these you see them nightly on television, missionary movements that go out to the poor, starving people of Africa and the poor people of China. These missions are being financed, but a lot of the big churches are not telling their people that it's being financed by oil companies. Oil companies and drug cartels are financing many of the church's missions throughout the world. We now know, we have documented proof beyond a shadow of a doubt that World War I, World War II were planned long in advance. The things which are going on in the Middle East have been planned for, I believe, at least 40 years, minimum. I can show you at least 40 years ago that this government, American government, was already keenly anticipating a major war in the Middle East. The corporation called United States, after the change of the century, coming into 1900s, decided they wanted to expand. They got so much money and they're doing so well. They thought maybe we could expand the business, move the corporation out a little bit. Let's expand business. Let's go to Germany or Europe and open up a big corporation there and take in their corporation, their government. We'll take them over. And the Germans said, "Hey, Jack, it's like a mafia. What are you coming over here? You're gonna buy me? I'll buy you. You don't buy me." Like the Godfather movie. What, you're going to come into Las Vegas and you're going to give me, and you're going to buy my hotels? Who says I'm going to sell my hotels? And the American corporation, British American corporation, said, unfortunately, maybe you didn't understand. Let me restate it so you understand. I didn't ask you. I'm telling you. We're moving in here. It's called a corporate takeover. And so there was a hostile corporate takeover where the American corporation decided they want to take over in Europe, and they didn't want to be taken over. Well, it's too bad. We'll take over anyway. So they called it a hostile corporate takeover. We call it World War I. So the corporation called United States was able to overthrow the existing corporate order in Europe, but it cost a lot of money. They had to build a lot of tanks and jeeps and pay a lot of people, and the corporation, well, they were successful. They did what they wanted to do, but they went broke doing it. And so when they went broke doing it, and then the bankers pulled their money out in 29, we had something called a stock market crash, because the corporation spent so much money, they went broke. So the international banker says, well, if you're broke, what are you coming to me for? I'm not going to loan you money if you're broke. And so what do you have as collateral? You got any collateral that you could put up for me to loan you the money? And the corporation called United States, the British corporation called United States, said, yes, we have the stock. We'll give you stock in the company. You are the stock in the corporation. So they give your body to the banks in Switzerland. So your body now becomes stock for the corporation called United States, because you are a money maker. Bankers came in and said, if we're going to loan you money, you guys have lost money, you guys have gone bankrupt, we're going to take care of the accounting. We're going to see where the money goes. We'll give you the money, but we're going to make it sure it goes where we want it to go. So they set up the Federal Reserve System, and then the collection agency to make damn sure that you people pay us. We're going to set up to keep a record of how much you owe us in business each week. We're going to call that the Federal Reserve. And to make sure that your stock, all the chumps out there in America working, make sure the stock pays us. We're going to make sure they pay us. You don't just tell me you're going to pay. I'm going to make sure they're going to pay. So we will set up a collection agency. Our own personal collection agency is called the Internal Revenue. You mess with us, Jack, and we're going to hurt your face. You owe us money. So the banks loan money to the privately owned corporation called United States, and the United States corporation gave your body, your birth certificate, to the banks as collateral for the loan, and that's why today Americans are nothing but slaves. Now this is something I want you to understand, and you need to listen carefully, because this is profoundly important. Most people have never heard this, and don't even understand what I'm trying to say. So try and follow what I'm going to tell you. There are two kinds of law on the earth, as I've said. One is called civil law, which is the law of the land, and one is called maritime admiralty, which is called the law of water. Maritime admiralty is banking law. And the law on the maritime admiralty says that you, because you came out of your mother's water, are a maritime admiralty product. This is why the ship is sitting in its berth and is tied to the dock, and the captain has to give a certificate of manifest to the port authorities, because money is changing hands. This is why when you were born, you have to have a birth certificate. And it's got to be signed by the dock, because that's where the ship is tied to, is the dock. So the dock signs your birth certificate. Why? Because you came down out of your mother's water. You came down her birth canal. You are a maritime admiralty product. And therefore your birth certificate is signed by your mother, And where your mother signed on the birth certificate, get it, you will see it does not say parent or mother, it says informant. Your mother was informing that the bank that she has just produced another product to be bought and sold. England, the British Crown, through international banking, owns your physical body, and that's the law. So you can think it's funny all you want. So the bottom line is that you are a maritime admiralty product, and therefore the banks own your body. And on the back of the Social Security card will be numbers in red. On the front will be in blue or black, but on the back will be in red. The numbers on the back of a Social Security card in red designate your body. It is the serial number of your stock. And this is why if you're wealthy, you are preferred stock. If you're poor, you are common stock. But you are a stock on the stock market. Your body is bought and sold through the use of your birth certificate. And if you could get your original birth certificate back, you would find that on the back of the birth certificate are all the banks around the world. All over the world, banks have used your birth certificate because you are a stock in a maritime admiralty banking scheme where you make money for banks. So consequently, the corporation and government and people who want to control you, they create a second you, and that second you that they control, that they created, is all capital letters. Check it out. Anytime you get a bill, you get a lawsuit, you get a fine, a ticket, somebody sends you a bill from the Department of Water and Power, check it out on your driver's license, on your Social Security card, on your insurance cards, anything, period. Anything having to do with business, your name will always be in all capital letters, because only all capital letters can be dealt with by banks and government. Anytime you have a name upper or lowercase, that applies to you. I got no control over you. You sign a contract in which your name is in all capital letters, now I can take you to court. Now I can take you. As a matter of fact, the judge sits on the bench. He rules from the bench. The word bench in Latin is a bank. Look it up in a Latin dictionary. So the judge rules from the bench. Right, because he's ruling for the bank. Why? Because somebody's going to pay. It's just a game here. The Queen of England wants a cut of the American blood. She wants a piece. So it's going, somebody's going to pay, and the money's going to go where? Into a bank. That's right. The judge rules for the bank. So consequently, if you are working in California making money, you are then referred to as a franchisee. You're a franchisee of a foreign corporation. 1849 Constitution of California. 1849 Constitution of California says, no California citizen will ever pay taxes in California state, ever. There will never be a state tax in California, ever. That's the Constitution in California. But if you say that you're a United States citizen, you're saying you work for a privately owned corporation called United States. Therefore, you are a franchisee of a foreign corporation. Therefore, you must pay the California Franchise Tax Board. Not California State Tax Board. There is no state tax in California. You pay the California Franchise Tax Board because you're a franchisee of a foreign corporation on the maritime banking law, international law. You work for the Queen of England. Your butt is owned by the Queen of England in a corporation called United States, while a man called Bush is the president of the British corporation. You want to talk treason? You need to wake up and find out how this stuff really works. Because once you understand that you don't need to submit yourself as an American to a British commercial venture called courts. You're an American. You don't need to go to court. There's nobody. You only go to court because you agreed to go to court. When they send you a subpoena to court or a summons to court, and they've sent you something, you look at it and say, hey, Jack, that's not me. That's in all capital letters. All capital letters is a corporation. It's a corpse. It's dead. Do I look like I'm dead to you? No, I'm an American, Jack. I ain't dead. And besides, I'll go to an American system for justice. I don't need no British Grand Lodge Masonic system called courts. This British Grand Lodge Freemasonic system called Inns of Court comes out of England. And it has manipulated, exploited, and lied to the people. And everybody in America thinks they got to go to court. Oh, the judge is, they've sent me something that I've got to go to court. I don't go to anybody's court. I'm an American. I don't need to go to court. That's the difference between being a free man and a slave. Very few Americans have ever really thought about the fact who was the enemy of this country when it was being founded. Who was it George Washington was at war with? Bloodshed on the field of battle. Who were the Americans fighting and dying on the field of battle, fighting to found this country? The Russians? No, as a matter of fact, the Russians were our supporters. The French? No. The French were supporting us. They loved us. They thought it was a great idea of somebody actually standing up for their rights and becoming a free people. And the French say, hey, that's sensational. Matter of fact, we'll come over and help you if you want. Anybody that fights against that bunch of cutthroat murderers, British royalty, will help. Even the Tsar of Russia said, hey, you guys going to revolt against England? Hey, about time. Somebody will come help you. And so Russia helped the Americans. French helped Americans. All over the world, people say, hey, it's about time you guys got out. I love it. See somebody stand up for their own rights and take their country and become a free people. Your enemy when you founded this country was England, British royalty. When Americans stood up in the field of battle and whipped the King of England's ass and sent the British back with their asses bleeding, all over the world, wealthy people, potentates, kings, rulers, princes, all the powerful people in the world, all over the earth, were watching. And they say, hey, we heard the King of England got his ass kicked last week by a little group of people called Americans. Well, they chased your ass out of town, didn't they? And consequently, the King of England became the laughing stock of the world. Everybody, hey, boy, he's got all the big army and the red coats and their guns and everything. That little bunch of Americans, they kicked your ass and sent you back crawling on your knees. What you going to do about that? You going to let him get away with that? And so the king realized he could not. They beat you on the field of battle, and they're mad. If you come back, they're going to kill you again. And so the King of England and the British royalty decided, no, we're not going to send any more people over there because you're not going to win. Those people are crazy, they got guns, and they're mad. Leave it alone. Just leave it alone. Later on, we'll dream up some things called United States government. And we'll incorporate it. And we will bring in what we call, let's say, call them attorneys and lawyers. And then we'll do business and sign contracts. And we'll be their friends. And one day, we're going to own them. The British invasion. They call the rock groups that came out of England the British invasion. That's not the only thing Britain invaded with. They invaded with treason, bloodshed, lies, deception. They've given us courts. They've made you into a corporation. They've made you so that you are politically dead. You walk into a courtroom and the judge wears a black robe. Black is the color of death. I mean, you've got Dracula wears a black robe. Frankenstein wears black. You know, always the jailer and the guy who's going to cut your head off wore the black robes. What is this black robe stuff of judges? Where does this black robe stuff come from? Somebody needs to do their homework and find out America has been raped. And the people who are running this country are nothing more than turncoats. They're traitors who have sold our great republic out. They've sold us out to our masters in England. I, for one, would like to see all British in this country, all British money, all British financing, all British corporations chased out of this country. Give them 72 hours to be out of this country, and you tell the Queen we're not sending over American boys into the Middle East to save your goddamn oil. Tell the Queen no longer will Americans crawl on their knees to that woman, to the Queen of England. What a travesty. What a travesty in this country to watch America, the great republic, being raped by the British royalty. Somebody needs to do their homework. It's all business. I don't want you to take this personal. It's just business. This is the way banks work. This is the way courts work. This is the way government works. They manipulate and use words and terms and frighten you. I, for one, am not only not frightened, I'm tired of the lies and deception. I'd like to see America free again. That's my feeling. And thank you and good night.